Bom dia.
Bom dia. Good morning. So welcome to this event. Bom dia a todos. Vocês sabem que esse evento vai ser em inglês, então vou, a partir de agora, falar basicamente em inglês. Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. I'm really excited to introduce our guests. Today's event is part of the Brazilian Peace Studies Conference, which will take place in a few days between the 17th and 19th of September at the University of São Paulo. And this is the second pre-event that we're holding online. And the theme is based on a book that was launched this year, and it's called Pacifism Today, a dialogue about alternatives to war in Ukraine by Maikel Jul Sorensen. So I'm really happy to have her here today with my esteemed colleague and friend, Luís Bravo. My name is Roberta Holanda Maschietto. I'm part of the organizing committee of the event. So without further ado, what we'll do today is basically a conversation about pacifism, which is a topic that still needs to be really further explored, especially in Brazil. So this is such an amazing opportunity for us to engage with the work of Maiken. So she's going to talk for about 15 minutes or so about her books, her ideas, how this book came about. And then we're going to have a more interactive section with Luís and I making a few questions on the book. And then we're going to open to the floor for all of you to participate and ask questions to Maiken about pacifism, her work, and anything related to that. So thank you so much. And I'll pass the floor to Luís.
Thank you, Roberta. Bom dia a todo mundo. Também dando um salve aqui em português inicialmente. So what a pleasure to be part of this event, of this activity. Thank you, Roberta. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for making this happen. And I would thank all the organization of the fifth or sixth actually Brazilian Peace Studies. I don't know if we can call it summit or congress, but anyway, a very important thing that has been taking place in the movement of peace studies here in Brazil. And I'm even more thankful to Maiken for so generously agreeing and offering her time to participating in this activity, to share a bit of what she has in mind and some of her very important ideas. One of the main nonviolence researchers in the world, as she is. So I will present her more formally now. And by the way, I didn't present myself. So my name is Luís Bravo, and I'm a peace and conflict practitioner and researcher, more engaged with restorative justice in the criminal justice system in Brazil. Right now, I'm a PhD candidate at the Federal University of ABC, Universidade Federal do ABC. And I'm hopefully will have this book published in Portuguese after my humble translation effort. We hope it happens sooner than later. So let me introduce formally Maiken Jul Sorensen. She's an associate professor of social science at Ostfold University College in Norway and Karlstad University in Sweden. She has written a number of books and academic articles about humor, political activism, nonviolent action, and constructive resistance at the intersection between sociology and peace studies. Previously, she was active in the international pacifist organization War Resisters International and its affiliates Aldrich Mir Krieg and OFOG. At the moment, her contribution to the peace movement is to write and keep dreams alive. That's beautiful. So, Maiken, welcome, and make yourself at home. What a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Luís, and thank you so much, Roberta, as well.
Thank you so much for having me and inviting me to join you on this event. And I'm very pleased to get the opportunity to briefly mention my book about pacifism today. So, and thank you so much for the introduction, Luís. And then I don't have to say much about myself. You almost said it all. But I'm someone who has kind of one foot in the academic world and one foot in the peace movement. And I think both are equally important. So even if I'm mainly been working in the academic world in the probably the last 10 years, then I still consider myself a peace activist as well. And I think this book, Pacifism Today, is an attempt to build bridges between these two worlds as well, to make academic work, both a bit of my own, but mainly other scholars, to make that accessible to a much wider audience than those who read academic articles and big dissertations. And as you mentioned, Luís, I have been doing work around humor and nonviolent action, and most recently about constructive resistance, which I think is also something we can touch upon later today. And yes, I also think my academic world fits quite well within this intersection between peace studies and sociology, or social science more broadly. The background to this text is kind of my own reflections and questions and thoughts when the full-scale invasion of Ukraine started in 2022, and I started to consider or reflect upon if it had changed anything in my own pacifist beliefs. And I ended up concluding that really nothing had changed, that I was still a pacifist. And then because I had started writing a bit to consider my own thoughts and to get things through my own head, then I thought maybe this is something that could be interesting to a broader audience and it's not just my own personal therapy. So the book is written as a dialogue between myself and the skeptic. And the skeptic is not a specific person, but it's kind of a representative of everybody who has ever questioned my pacifist commitment and asked me questions about pacifism and nonviolence more broadly. So this is not a real person, but I think it could have been. I mean, it could have been a number of different people. And the intended audience here is people who have a gut feeling that war is wrong, that there must be other options, there must be alternatives, that we have to end this endless cycle of violence. And no matter if it's in Ukraine or Gaza or Sudan or Yemen or anywhere else, that it can't continue like this. So having this feeling or experience that this can't be right with all these wars, but maybe looking for arguments and putting words on rational arguments on these thoughts. So that's what I have been trying to do with this book, to find these arguments, present my arguments for why war is not and never will be a solution. And it's a popular science book. I'm drawing on a bit of my own work, but mainly on other scholars' work. And I just want to emphasize that these scholars, I don't think they are pacifists, at least not all of them. Some of them are, but probably not all. But they have been writing about nonviolence and doing really interesting work about nonviolence. And I also just want to mention that I am not an area specialist on Ukraine and Russia. I don't follow like the day-to-day developments of the war, and so I cannot answer any detailed questions about specific events. I think it's tragic what is happening, both in this region as well as in all other wars. And it breaks my heart to see all the suffering in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Yemen, in Sudan, and everywhere else where people are victims of violence. And as I mentioned, this is a quite personal book. I think this is the most personal text I have ever published. But asking I would say, kind of the standard questions that I have been asked as a pacifist. And here I'm trying to answer them in the context of Ukraine. But I think it's I will be honest to say that the answers would basically be the same, no matter which war we are talking about. So the kind of the basic answers don't change, but of course the nuances would change, and the context will change, and the context matters a lot. But the kind of the underlying assumptions about pacifism and war will not change. So if I should try to explain kind of my pacifist commitment, why am I a pacifist? I would say that there are three parts to this answer. And the first part is that there's a moral argument that it's wrong to kill other people, and that's a quite simple answer. But that's kind of the starting point for me. So that's the first point. The second point is to look at the consequences of war, and that's might be a bit more elaborate on how you answer that. But how I see it is that the price of war is simply too high, that what could potentially be gained with an armed struggle will lose too much on the way. We lose too much of what we want to protect in terms of dignity, in terms of respect for human rights and respect for human life. And all of this, or so much of this, gets lost during an armed struggle and during combat. And I just don't think that that price is worth paying. And then a third part of the answer to why I'm a pacifist is that today we have so much knowledge about nonviolent alternatives, and the alternatives, we know so much about them. And I say we as a society, or we as humanity. I'm not talking about individual knowledge, but about what we collectively know about nonviolence is so developed today that there's no longer any excuse for using violence, because the knowledge that exists about all the other options has been developing so much in the last, 40, 50 years, that we now have so many other options so I would say, let's try to explore them and experiment with them and try them out and give them a chance, the same way that violence have had a chance for the last centuries. Now it's time for peace and nonviolence, and to have that play a role in the future. And most of this little text, or this little book, is about the last part. And I'm drawing quite heavily on two US researchers called Erika Chenoweth and Maria Steffen, and the work that they have done. And they mainly write about regime change within countries. So when dictators are brought down by their own populations, that's most of the case studies, or the most of the studies they have included. But they also do have some work on occupations, like the one in Ukraine. And they, even if that's not the majority of the cases. So this study already has some years behind it. It was published their book was published in 2011. And where their main conclusion is that nonviolence is twice as likely to succeed as armed struggle. And to reach this conclusion, they were comparing 323 cases between 1900 and 2006. And that's all the campaigns of both non-violent campaigns and violent campaigns that they were able to identify in this more than 100 years. And even if this study is becoming more known, or it's quite known within peace studies, I would argue that it's still very unknown within the general public. Most people that I encounter have never heard about this, and they are very surprised to hear about the conclusions, because they go so much against this kind of common sense idea that violence is most effective way to create change. So I still think we have there's a huge possibility to make this work more known to more people. And what they are illustrating, or kind of what's important when it comes to nonviolence, and what their work also shows, is how the methods of resistance are so much broader and so much more than demonstrations in public spaces. So demonstrations in public spaces might be kind of the first thing that comes to mind when people say nonviolent action, or, you know, we have to make a protest. We gather as many people as possible and get them to march on the streets. And that's, of course, one option. And under some circumstances, that can be highly effective. But I would argue, and their research also shows, that that on its own is seldom enough to create any durable change. And in times of occupations, like what we see in parts of Ukraine today, this is, of course, extremely risky and would just, you know, putting a lot of people's lives on the line without much chance to gain anything. So that's why it's important to be aware of all these other options and all these other possibilities. And in these kind of dangerous circumstances, it's especially important to experiment with, or to explore the options of economic and political non-cooperation. So that is kind of boycotting events, staying away from events, where you kind of would, instead of gathering on the street, you withdraw from public spaces and staying away. And that's a way of showing dissatisfaction, but in a much less risky way. One of the examples that I use in the book, and give in the book, is a quite old one from the Nazi occupation of Norway. And this particular example is from 1942, where the teachers were organizing to prevent the Nazification of the Norwegian schools and to prevent the Nazi ideology to be distributed in the schools and to the children. So the Nazis, they wanted to force all teachers to be members of a Nazi organization. And what happened was that almost all of the teachers refused. And this was organized kind of underground, because the ordinary unions had been dissolved, but the teachers nevertheless managed to organize and spread information that we are all going to send an individual letter on the exact same day. So they chose a particular day to send, and encouraged all teachers to send a letter. And it was the overwhelming majority of teachers participated in this. And it was extremely successful. And that Nazi organization was never, I mean, it existed officially, but it never really had any members. And the Nazi Norwegian Prime Minister, Vidkun Quisling, he ended up, you know, blaming the teachers for all of his defeats. Yeah. So what I also try to do in the book is to talk about how who is kind of most likely, in the case of Ukraine and Russia, who is most likely to bring Putin from power. And I still argue that I think the Russian people, the Russian civilian population, is the most likely candidate to do this. I'm not saying that it's gonna be easy, or that it's, you know, gonna happen soon, but in my opinion, that's kind of the only option that I see. It could also be a military coup, but I don't think that will solve any issues. And then I also try to draw some parallels of how this would be easier for the Russian civilian population to build this kind of movement if they were not feeling threatened by any war in Ukraine. So I'm trying to link these possibility for a nonviolent struggle in Ukraine to also what can potentially happen within Russia. And maybe in the question sections we can talk more about the possibilities in Ukraine. I'm not saying that there's a lot of no, sorry, I'll withdraw a little. I'll say there are nonviolent actions taking place in Ukraine. There has been nonviolent action organizing going on, but at the moment it's completely overshadowed by the war and the demand for more soldiers, the demand for more conscripted soldiers, the demand for more weapons, the demand for more support from NATO countries. So it's not like it's a huge movement or anything at the moment. So what I'm discussing is much more hypothetical, kind of what could have happened, what could people have done if they have been prepared and trained and decided to do it. Okay, so I now argued that we have, as a society, we have a lot of knowledge about nonviolent action. And then one can ask, why is it not this knowledge not more widespread? How come that the Ukrainians are assuming that their only option is a violent and armed response, or that other people in other countries so frequently think that the only option is to respond to violence with more violence? And one of the obstacles to seeing all these nonviolent alternatives is this extremely dominant and prevailing perception that the military and an armed struggle is the only possible solution. So this is a discourse that dominates all of aspects of our societies. It dominates in our movies and our films and so many conversations in the media. And it's extremely hard to even kind of get a foot in the door and present other options when you live within such a militaristic and violent culture. And I have been a pacifist all of my adult life, but I do see one change that has happened while I have been kind of growing up and living. And that is the research that has been coming out in the last 20, 30, 40 years, and which is becoming more known also within the peace movement, at least. And that means that this knowledge about nonviolence being more effective than violence means that choosing nonviolence is no longer only about morality. It's not only about you not wanting to kill someone else, but it's also about kind of what is most effective. And to me, personally, the moral aspect matters a lot. I still think it's wrong to kill other people. I also think that a nonviolent struggle that is built on a moral commitment is much more likely to be experienced as sincere when it's not just about efficiency, but also has a strong ethic or moral commitment. However, I do think that in addition to the moral arguments, we now have serious and good research that is backing up that the nonviolent alternatives are actually much more likely to succeed in leading to change. And I think that's for like everybody who wants to fight for peace, this is a major game changer. That we are not, those of us who are arguing that nonviolence is effective, it's going to create change, we are not the ones who are naive. Those, as I have been accused of so many times, that I'm just a naive believer thinking that all people are good, which I don't necessarily think. No, but those who are not, those who are naive today are those who believe that war can create peace, because they are the ones who are irrational and naive and are not listening to the scientists. And as the world looks today, I don't think there's much to be optimistic about, but this actually do make me a bit hopeful, because it's only because there are other options. We do know about them, and beliefs do change, and there are other options. So that's what I thought I would start with saying. Hope that wasn't too much more than 15 minutes. And let's see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Maikel. And I just want to invite everyone who is here in Zoom to, whenever they want, start putting their questions. Then we're going to share them with Mike afterwards. Or you can also, at the end, we're going to have a special moment and you can even say your question live and discuss with us. But for now, I think Luís and I would like to put a few questions, provocations for you. So let's start with Luís.
All right. Thank you, Mike. And I could stay here listening to you for hours. So many insights, and welcome to the naive club, or all of you, all of us. Yeah. But yeah, this is it's very heartwarming and reassuring, right? To realize that more and more we have this this possibility of acting nonviolently for political purposes or whatever, to be backed by good research and showing its effectiveness. That's very important. So the conversation in the book is instigated by a skepticism on ways of transforming, maybe solving certain conflicts that are not based either on the threat of violence or the persuasiveness of economic gains. Your skeptic counterpart stubbornly nurtures an idea that unarmed struggle means idleness, submissiveness, and most likely would give way to a humiliating capitulation. You went a little bit about that in your opening remarks here. So beyond its ethical legitimacy, as you said, you make the case for nonviolence based on relatively new research that evidences the effectiveness of nonviolent action for both the achievement of more immediate results and the realization of beneficial, long-lasting effects. So could you please elaborate a bit on how nonviolence affects the power dynamics in situations of armed conflict? This is one question. The other question would be, what would be the most compelling points, maybe 3 of them, I don't know, as many as you feel like. What would be the most compelling points about dedicating oneself to unarmed struggle you would pitch to angry, unresigned people, and maybe naive people wanting to change the world?
Okay, thank you. I think these kind of, to me, they flow into each other. This two questions you pose about the power dynamic. The power dynamics is also important points that I would give to the people who want to involve themselves in unarmed struggle. I think they belong together. And I would say, kind of, if I should try to list it a bit as points, that the first point would be that armed struggle is based on a certain kind of logic. It's kind of this: I strike you and you strike back at me, and I bomb you and you bomb me. And even if it's an asymmetric in power, that one is a much bigger, powerful country than the other country, it's still the same type of logic. And this means that you're kind of playing the game of the country or the person who has the most force. And if you were trying to respond to an armed attack with an armed counterattack, it's kind of, you are getting into this internal cycle of violence that we need to break. And then when you look at, and this is of course very, very simplified, and I'm completely aware that armed struggle is also something very complex. But nonviolence does have a very different logic to it. So it's kind of, if you are attacking me, you're playing the violent game or the violence game. But if I respond with nonviolence, I'm responding by playing a different game that has a different logic to it. So if you try to get me to submit by using force, I will try to navigate around your armed attack by responding in a way that you don't expect or that you don't understand, or that doesn't kind of fit the way you know the game of violence. And understanding this difference in logic is really crucial. I think also for anybody who wants to engage in this, to really grasp how different the dynamics become when you are involved in a non-violent struggle, or if you're trying to give an armed response. So as soon as you have an armed struggle that is met with another kind of armed counter struggle, it's military might that set the agenda, and nonviolence instead, it's the creativity that sets the agenda. And again, this is of course very simplified, but if you are facing a major military power and you don't have more arms or more soldiers, then you can never win this game as long as you are trying to play on his terms, and you will much more likely to benefit from playing a different game if you are the weaker part. So that's kind of one part of it. This is kind of the general, the logic of struggle is so different if you're using arms and if you are not using arms, depending on whose terms you're playing on. So my other kind of advice, which is also linked to this power dynamics, is to think strategically. That people who want to create change don't just kind of jump into the first that comes to mind. So don't start with calling for a big public demonstration, because that might not be the best way forward. And to really analyze and try to understand what are the vulnerabilities of the other side. And then planning and training and planning and training and planning and training. Those who see the most long-term durable results are those who are understanding these power struggles and doing a good analysis around them. Then, of course, it's also about having resources and getting people to commit to your course. So having the right strategy is not enough, but it's not enough either to have a big amount of people if they're not doing smart and creative and clever things. So my recommendation, since you were asking about kind of recommendations, would be to rather start small and then grow gradually. And have a few committed people who understand this logic of armed struggle, who understand how it's possible or most likely to undermine the pillars that are supporting the other side. And just also remember that nonviolence is not a walk in the park. It's not like just because you are not armed that people will just respect you and, be nice to you, because lots of nonviolent activists get killed every year. So it's still dangerous. Which is also why you should know what you're doing and try to understand what you're doing and do it smart, so you're not risking people's lives without reaching your goals. And this also brings me to kind of the next point, which is that it's a misunderstanding if you think that nonviolence is not requiring any sacrifices, because it is dangerous and it is risky, and it does require a willingness to run a risk. And then, of course, different people will have different possibilities depending on where they are in their lives, of what kind of risks they're willing to take. So it's not like you have to be longing to die to be a nonviolent activist, but on some occasions, some people are doing things that are very risky. And in that sense, this is not different from the armed struggle, where everybody is expecting the soldier who is fighting back to be willing to risk his life or her life. And it's not different from that. But here, it's just that with a nonviolent struggle, you have a greater chance of seeing your struggle actually leading to change. Okay, and the fourth point I want to make is that is related to what I mentioned briefly about constructive resistance and the work I have been doing around constructive resistance. And that is that I'm increasingly thinking and believing that the more people who want change start to build already now what it is that they want instead, the more likely they are to succeed and to see their goals become more durable. So building alternative structures, and so much or a bit of nonviolent action is based on, you're demanding that others should change. You're demanding that others change laws or policies. But what I think increasingly is important is that to start yourself, start here and now, start in the small setting to build what it is that you want, together with your neighbors and your friends and your colleagues and also those that you disagree with, that you start to build the alternatives rather than wait for someone else to provide them for you. And the more this kind of construction of alternatives and resisting what you're against, the more you manage to integrate that, the more likely you are to succeed, is my claim. I don't have any statistics to back it up like Chenoweth and Stefan have in their study, but I do think it's I still want to make that argument and that claim that combining and integrating construction and resistance is a good way forward, I think.
Thank you, Maikel. Thank you so much. I think we cannot stress the importance of constructive resistance enough. So I just would like to introduce people we've mentioned that you've recently published a book called Constructive Resistance, Resisting Injustice by Creating Solutions, together with Stellan Windhagen and my dear Jorgen Johansson. And hopefully we can translate that to Portuguese also, maybe in the near future.
That would be nice.
Yes, yes. Just very short remarks about all that you've said and all those very enriching pieces of mind. I remember one Gandhi associate when he talked about the power of the movement there in India, and he was saying that he was talking to the reporter and he said, well, about this movement, about the power of this movement, if you arrest me or kill me, and our movement is very well organized, the movement becomes stronger. So how can you meet my challenge? So, I mean, this directly goes to what you said, talking about how the game works. And one thing that I would like to share with people here in Brazil, or there is one book by one of the few books written or translated to Portuguese about the philosophy of nonviolence, is John Marie Miller, Philosophy of Nonviolence, Filosofia da Não Violência. And there he talks about what you've touched upon relating to how to deal with the risk of death and fear. But I think there's one thing that maybe would be worth saying is that I think there are researchers, social science papers and researchers showing that it's much more riskier for you, it's much more likely for you to be killed if you are carrying a weapon than if you are not carrying a weapon. This is risk-free, as you said, but I think that it's interesting to think about that as well a little bit. But so thank you so much for all that you shared. Roberta.
Well, thank you so much, Maikel, for your presentation of the book and how it came about. And it's so refreshing for me, you know, while you were talking, I was going back in time and remembering about when I decided to do my PhD in peace studies. I went to Bradford University, and at the time, it was a big decision because we didn't have this crowd we have today in Brazil. We didn't have a network, so it was even a more distant topic, you know, to study peace. And at the time, I was reading Gandhi's autobiography, and it brought so many reflections into my life. I transitioned. I mean, he was a strict vegetarian. It was really about principled nonviolence, and it really got into my heart. So that's when I started my journey into the peace studies. And but looking from that time until today, in a way, even though I've been engaging with peace studies, reading your book made me realize that sometimes we kind of lose hope, you know, and so it was so refreshing to read because it's like a callback, you know. It's not just about, sometimes we get caught into the academia and, you know, and arguing, and sometimes we lose focus of all the possibilities that are related to the nonviolent action and pacifism. And it just, I mean, in a way, our Peace Network and the Peace Studies conference that we have, it's in a way a call to bring this discussion. But I think there's something much more specific about what you're saying, which is how can I really change the world, right? How can I do something big, not only discuss peace, but how can I really bring about social change in a way that alters the way we think about the possibilities, you know? I think it's really an important topic to bring, and I hope it stays with us after today in a much more stronger way within our network, and especially when your book will be translated and it's going to be easier for people to read here in Brazil. So you said so many interesting things, but before I jump into the question that I had prepared, I just want to make a few other comments, because one thing that you mentioned, it's really about the effectiveness of nonviolent action. And a couple of years ago, I was actually working on a teaching module on peace studies and on a lot of literature related to pacifism and the work of China Wade. And I was actually, I wasn't familiar with the data. And so it struck me how ignorant we are about the numbers, and how actually they reinforce the need to change our approach to peace. I came across this report from 2018 from China Wade and Ivan Berkowski. And they were really looking at, I just got the numbers here, 308 popular uprisings until 2013. And they found that the nonviolent uprisings, like they really led to far less mass killings. Like there was a difference on 68%. So when you say pacifism is risky, sometimes it may not be safe, and people, see, maybe I need to, have my gun. But actually, it's far more dangerous when you do have a gun, right? So yes, it's risky, it's dangerous, but it's also far more dangerous in the other way. So it's really about putting it in the proportion. At the time, I also happened to check, what's going on in terms of nonviolence. And sometimes I think it's really important what you mentioned. It's not just about going on the streets and make protests, because sometimes it is even more dangerous. And then I came across this situation in Myanmar and the civil disobedience movement, and I found it fascinating. For those who are not familiar with it, after the coup, the civil servants decided that they didn't want to support the military, so they just stopped working. Doctors, employees, and it was amazing. But what makes the difference there, and I think this is the challenge for us, is the numbers. As you mentioned, it's not just one person, 10 people going on the street and saying, hey, but really to bring about this massive engagement. Because if everyone stops working, the state collapses. Doesn't matter the guns, I mean, how are you going to work if you don't have doctors, you don't have, people doing their daily jobs? So even the military cannot live without a certain amount of legitimacy and acceptance, right? So just to put this into context and just to stress how fascinating this is. But then again, there goes the challenges, right? And I think for me, one of the big challenges is really about the mentality, regardless of the data. And I think one problem is really we need to make this data more and more and more public, to show people, look, it's wrong the way you're doing it, look at the data. This is pure science, and check the numbers. But I think we got stuck into an understanding that the state, the world we live in, the international system with the states as the main social units, right? They're predicated on the understanding that violence, and its control, it's important. So, and I'm thinking of also curriculum. I mean, my background is international relations, but I'm pretty sure in law is the same, political science, to a certain extent, sociology, everything, it starts with the state, right? And so how did the state come about? You have a whole very, very violent history leading to state formation. But then again, what makes it legitimate? Is this supposedly under control of the legitimate monopoly of violence? And so the key instrument to maintain the state safe, supposedly, is the armed forces, right? And so my provocation is here also, so let's put this out. I mean, is this a problem in itself? Because when you think about the role of violence as a certain instrument to control society and to protect the state, we're talking about a big corporation. and they also have interests. They're not there just to protect, people. You're talking about the arms industry. You're talking about different kinds of interests. And how do we change this? I mean, to a certain extent, different kinds of authors, literature, like feminist movements, and feminist scholars have discussed a lot, the problem with these assumptions of very militarized and masculine understanding of how the state works. But how do we change this? When you say, I mean, that people call you naive, I've been called naive by my dad several times when I say I want to study, peace stuff. So can you imagine like writing a policy report and going to the Congress and say, what, maybe we should rethink the role of, the armed forces and military, and how do we do this? Do you think it's possible to really put pacifism first, while retaining this current idea of state that we have and the role of the armed forces? Can we perhaps change the role of the armed forces or how they engage with the state? I mean, we do have cases of states that do not have armed forces, but, so I would like to throw this question to you and hear your thoughts about that.
Well, thank you, Roberta, for a very good question. And also, well, first of all, thank you for pointing out the risks with engaging in nonviolence for being less risky than an armed struggle. And of course, I absolutely agree with you. So thank you for clarifying that. And when it comes to your last question about the state and militarism, I think that nationalism and militarism is very closely interlinked. They kind of mutually reinforce and depending on each other, and also on the capitalist economy and how you were talking about the arms industry. And I think in the current world order that those who are profiting from war, they are just laughing all the way to the bank at the moment. They're having great times. Historically, there has been a lot of pacifists. Well, there's been pacifists who have been very supportive of the state, and they have believed that it's possible to kind of demilitarize the state. And from my understanding, they imagine that it's kind of possible to have the state system more or less as it is, just without the armies. And in my opinion, I don't think that's really possible. But these people, they have demanded, for instance, that in countries that have conscription and military service, obligatory for everybody or all males or for everybody, that they have imagined that, instead of having a military service, we'll have a 1 year where we learn about nonviolence, and it will be organized by the state. And I think that's not realistic, but that's my personal opinion. So I'm definitely not speaking for all pacifists when I'm saying this. But in my own thinking, I have been much more inspired by the anarchists' thinking and about decentralization of power. For instance, John Holloway, what he's writing, and self-organizing at the community level, that you have to disperse power to the degree possible rather than centralize power as it's done in the state system. And I think that's also because I mentioned that nationalism and militarism go hand in hand, but they also go hand in hand with patriarchy, with environmental destruction that we're witnessing today, with racism and with capitalism and a bunch of other isms that we don't want, or at least that I don't want in society. So I think I think you're right, that we have to look towards other types of solutions. I'm trying to hint at it towards the end of the book, but it's I didn't want it to be too long a book, so it's not so much about it. But I am hinting at how we need to think more of kind of civil society, self-organizing at a community level, and that the state is not going to provide us with the training for nonviolence, because all knowing about nonviolence actions might be, of course, be a threat against a potential occupier, but it can also be a threat for that state itself or for that government itself. So that's why I think that they will be hesitant. The states will be hesitant to encourage anything along the lines of nonviolence. They like it as long as it's a protest on a Sunday, and as long as it's not really providing any proper threat. But as soon as it's coming to the kind of economic institutions, something more prolonged, then they don't like it. But it looks nice as a kind of see how democratic and tolerant we are, because we are tolerating dissent, but they don't want the dissent to go too deep. So that's my take on that. But thanks for asking you. I think it's really important to bring up.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think you made like really important connections here with capitalism as well, and everything is really mixed up. And I love that you mentioned John Holloway. He was such an inspiration in my PhD, the idea of anti-power. And
yeah, exactly.
And I think it's really about us looking at alternatives that are really more substantial. So, but thank you so much for pointing all these big connections. So I'm thinking I'll just pass the floor to Luís, and we'll already also have a few questions here. I'll leave it to you, Luís. We probably won't be able to ask everything that we wanted, and I'd rather that we have more participation of our colleagues who are here online. So Luís, I'll leave it to you.
Okay, yes, we have to be aware of the little time we have. Very fruitful and enriching activity. And so I will offer one reflection, Maiken, about something that is very, very alive in this historical moment in the world, and I think it's very worth talking about, very important for us to reflect a little bit about it. You said it yourself that what you offer about what you touch upon regarding the war in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, the Russian invasion in Ukraine, and all the aspects that you bring about regarding nonviolence as a tool would apply to any other war situation in the world, or violent conflict for that matter. Of course, each scenario has its peculiarities or specificities, and of course, it would demand a specific planning, different types of planning and of strategizing. But I would like to I cannot help but to think about what is taking place in Palestine. So maybe if we can hear a little bit about you and listening to you on what you have to think about that. Shortly after the book was released, your book was released, we've seen an unprecedented escalation of violence in Palestine with the October 7th Hamas attack. You talked a little bit about this situation in the book. You go through it, superficially, but though we could draw some similarities between both scenarios, the Russian invasion in Ukraine and what's taking place in Palestine, I think there are important differences for us to consider, and differences to be considered for the elaboration of unarmed strategies to deal with such scale of violence. We have been hearing a lot of calls for a ceasefire, together with the skepticism that diplomatic outcome brokered by the US would serve to reinforce the oppressive status quo and not address the historic and systemic persecution suffered by the Palestinian people. So with this extermination endeavor, in my view, still taking place in Gaza, how would it be possible to conceive nonviolent strategies to reach an immediate cessation of hostilities and deal with historical and structural violence? And could you possibly share with us any case study of a successful nonviolent campaign in the Israel-Palestine conflict? And what would be the active nonviolent or nonviolence efforts underway in that region that you think are worth mentioning, if you happen to know any?
Okay, thank you. This was several questions in one, I think, but I'll try to reflect a bit on the situation in Gaza, and this is kind of a conflict that's been going on for like a century, so it's a long history here, and I think if you're looking at the kind of what are the differences between the situations in Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, Palestine, I think probably the main difference is the US position. So kind of what does the only superpower in the world think about this? And how does that superpower relate to those who possess most to those who are attacking or occupying a neighboring territory? And so that I think is the reason also why the whole discussion around this becomes so different depending on which situation you are in. So to me, all violence is wrong, no matter who is committing it, no matter if it's Hamas or if it's Israel or if it's Russia or if it's Ukraine. I think it's always violence is always problematic. But in this case, it's also, you were asking also about Palestinians' nonviolent struggles, and there have been throughout the years, there's been some attempts at nonviolent struggles and campaigns from the Palestinian side. So the first intifada in the late 1980s and the early 1990s was predominantly nonviolent and concerned with self-organizing and consciousness raising among the Palestinians. And later on, there have also been campaigns against the wall, the building of the separation wall, or so-called separation wall, apartheid wall, whatever you want to call it, between Israel and Palestine that Israel built on Palestinian land. And these campaigns have also been involving Israelis who are against the occupation. But they have not, I mean, there have been smaller success, might have been a tiny success here and there, but it's not been successful. So you can say from the Palestinian perspective that they have tried armed struggle, they have tried nonviolent struggle, and so far they have not been successful in any of it. So I'm afraid I can't really point towards a good nonviolent campaigns from Palestinians. I think we can only hope, and the Israelis can hope, that the Palestinians will realize the power of nonviolence. But unfortunately, I don't see that happening anywhere near in the future, unfortunately. But we can try to remain hopeful. And then you also ask what can others do? And I kind of creating an immediate ceasefire from outsiders with nonviolent means is also something I have trouble see happening. But I do want to. Your question led me to remind myself of another development that's been in the last 40 years in the peace movement, and that's the presence of kind of unarmed bodyguards or nonviolent interventions from so-called third parties. So how people who are not themselves directly involved in a violent conflict, how they decide to travel to other places and as a kind of interpositioning or a kind of accompaniment of people who are at risk. So there has been some very, very interesting cases around this in Latin America with the, I'm thinking of the Peace Brigades International and its history in Guatemala during military dictatorship there. The American organization, or the North American organization called Witness for Peace, and its work in Nicaragua as two very interesting examples of so-called third parties who are trying to intervene and successfully intervening. So these two organizations that I mentioned were rather small scale, but if we're trying to remain hopeful and optimistic and think about how this could be scaled up, how this, instead of being a handful of international peace activists, are thousands of people who are traveling to somewhere else. And in relation to that, it's really important to think about who would the Israelis don't want to kill, and who would the Russians don't want to kill. So if you're thinking kind of who would the Israeli Defense Force worry about killing of nonviolent activists, they would be extremely worried about killing US citizens. And who would the Russians be afraid of killing in Ukraine, who were there to protect the Ukrainians? They would be afraid of killing someone the Russian government still want to be friends with. So, and I mean, me going there, getting killed, Putin wouldn't care. But some of the people he would want to continue to be friends with, that could potentially make a difference. And I think, for instance, Brazilians, South Africans, where the Russian government still are trying to uphold, some kind of relationship, that they would be worried if they suddenly had a lot of Brazilians in Ukraine that would put themselves in between the soldiers on the front line. Then they would hesitate to shoot, I think, those on the top of the hierarchies. Okay, I'm not sure this really answered your questions, but it was touching on some of the things that you mentioned. So I will let you decide if you want to continue with some of the questions you had thought about, or if we should let some of the people from the audience maybe get a chance to ask their questions or bring in their comments.
All right. Thank you, Mike. And you sure did. Very insightful answer. Thank you so much. I would just like to take the opportunity also to share this information. It's that you are associated with a publishing house called Irene Publishing. So there is the internet website, irenepublishing.com. We'll share specifically this address in the video. I think we can do that in the YouTube video that people will be able to access. And I just didn't want to not mentioning that before we leave. Not that we are leaving right now, but yeah. So I pass the word to Roberta. We can.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Luís. Maybe you can also share this link in the chat to everyone. So, and then we can also add it on YouTube. So I'm gonna, instead of asking my own question for now, I'll just gonna stress one question that we have here from Ana Guimarães. She says, congratulations on writing a book on such an important and relevant topic today. And she would like to know a little bit more about the book, how the book is structured. I mean, you spoke a little bit about the book, but maybe it's interesting to show how you design the chapters. And also she was interested to know, why did you choose the dialogue thing instead of something different, And I will invite, you can answer that, and maybe I will invite, if anyone wants to maybe raise their hands, we can pass the floor to you, or else we'll add other questions later on. So if anyone wants, please just raise your hand here. Please, Maikel.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to mention, or thank you for the question, that it's a kind of, the book is around 70 pages, so I'm not sure what to call it, if it's a book or a booklet or an essay, a long essay or whatever it is. But this text is deliberately, I tried not to make it too long. I love writing. My thesis was 600 pages, so I'm very proud of myself now for writing something this short. To me, this is like something like what others would call a tweet. To me, this is really brief. But it's structured around at the moment, at the top of my head, I can't remember exactly what the chapters are called, but it's like in a format of a dialogue, because I hoped it would be more readable and a bit more engaging for people who are not so used to reading so much. And but it started out as a conversation I had with myself. So I had these questions in my head, and in order to try to answer them, I would put them in writing, and then I would try to, okay, how would I respond to this? How do I respond to this if someone asks me? So this is how it came about, with this voice in my own head, and then I put it on the computer and on paper to deal with it. Yeah, and it's quite short. I'm also, in addition to what we have already talked about, I'm also bringing in kind of NATO's role in all this, because I don't think you can talk about Ukraine and Russia without also talking about NATO's position and how NATO is part of this conflict, even if it's not directly involved. I don't think we would have the situation we have today if NATO had not been expanded eastward in the way it did in the last decades. So that's kind of one topic that we haven't really talked about, but which is also in there. And then I have tried to make quite a bit of examples, also in the hope of it being more readable. So I mentioned the case of Norway. There I also do say a bit more about the things that are brought up here about Nicaragua and Witness for Peace and Guatemala and Peace Brigades International, and this kind of the logic in this nonviolent intervening not from states, but from civilians who deeply care about what's going on the other side of the globe. And willing also to take risks, even if it's of course not the same level of risks as people who are living in these wars. Yes, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mike. And also, I think it's important to tell people, I mean, we know Luís is working on a translation, but if someone wants to read the original version, can we buy it online? Is it open access, or should we access Irene, or is it on Amazon? Is there an ebook? If we can just tell this practical stuff,
Okay.
so people
Yeah,
can know.
absolutely. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. So it's available online for free. If you want to read it just online in English, you're welcome to do that. It's also possible from Irene to order it as a printed text. It's not very expensive compared to what many other books cost. And then they will have it sent to you. Yes, so, and it's this online version, there's also PDF that you can download to your computer. And that is Creative Commons. And the printed one is just to cover the printing cost.
Ah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It makes it easier, especially here in Brazil, because sometimes foreign books for us, when you think of of the exchange rate, it's a little bit tricky, but it's great news. So everybody's invited to check the book. And from my end, I find
I will share the link on the chat. Would that be okay?
Yes, absolutely, please.
Yeah, I'll do it now, and then good.
Please share it widely. Share it with your friends.
Yes,
all of you who participate.
And I think I just also want to stress, going back to the question that was put there, it's such an easy book to read, and at the same time you bring so much information, really dense information, but in such an easy way to read. So it's something that you can share with your mom or someone that is not academic. So I think that's the job we have to do now if you want to spread the word. It's not a dense book that we, to academicists, that it's like, has this difficult language. On the contrary, so it's really easy to read. So I vividly recommend. I don't know, I haven't seen any other manifestation of people maybe are too shy, but I just want to pose a final question and also give time for our colleagues to maybe raise their hands. And it relates to, this activist part of you. I mean, let's say we want to become more engaged in a peace movement. What would be the tips that you will give? Where do we start? What do we read? I mean, in the book you have a short annotated bibliography, but what would you recommend for us to check, to follow on social media, things that we could do? And also from the education aspect, I mean, we have lots of academics in our network. Let's say we want to explore this topic. How would you recommend we deal with this? Besides also reading books, do you propose any kind of, activity or experience that we can bring into the classroom to, get young people more engaged with this? And so maybe one day in the long run, my daughter or my granddaughter, will be less naive and more, realistic when they talk about, they will feel that it's more real to talk about pacifism and seeing it happen in the world.
I think kind of for getting more people engaged, I believe in sharing good stories, that you are kind of sharing examples of how people did achieve change, how people did manage to reach their goals, even if it's not something huge, but even in a smaller scale, to give children especially, but also the rest of us this experience or knowledge about that it's not hopeless, that there are possibilities to create change. And I think the greatest inspiration is to see what others have done and how they have managed. And of course, all situations are unique, and you should never try to just copy what they did somewhere else on the other side of the world 50 years ago, because with social media, the world has changed a lot. But like children, they love, my experience with children is like they love these stories where you have heroes. They like good versus evil. They like to see when the good forces win. And I think showing how that doesn't have to be violent, but how that can be done, how you can win because you are smart, and because you are creative, and not because you are the strongest. And there are some cartoons as well who's playing on that, and I think that's a good kind of starting point. And then of course it's also related to how you foster kind of cooperation rather than competition, to kind of how can we cooperate together, children and adults, or children and children from different backgrounds, from different places and different skin color, different whatever, different ways. How can we cooperate to solve a problem, that rather than how can we compete with each other? I think that's also something that we need a lot more of in the world. And let's me see. I had we talked a bit about hopes and dreams, and I think that's also a really important topic to remember in relation to education. How we need to talk about what we want instead. It's a bit like you mentioned previously, Roberta, when it comes to the state. So if we don't want the state, what is it that we want instead? How do we want to organize society with this decentralization of power? And in this, I'm much inspired by Elise Boulding, a peace educator, and how she wrote about cultures of peace. And I don't remember the exact quote, but her point was that if we want to create change, we also need to try to imagine what is it that we want. Is it that we want to live? Because if we cannot even imagine this, we will never know what are the first steps we need to take in order to get there. We need to kind of map this and the steps that we want to take. And in order to know that, we need to be able to dream big and have hopes and share them with each other, not just sit there each by ourselves and have our own little bubbles, but to go out and talk with each other about, imagine that we did this instead. And of course, I'm not saying that it's easy. I mean, we live in very individualistic cultures where, we are competing against each other, and we are brought into this militaristic and violent cultures which seep into all aspects of our societies, and kind of have what do you call it? Kind of contaminate from the militarism to other areas of society about competition and yeah, and violence.
That's so powerful what you said. It just made me realize that in academia as adults, and since our young age, I'm remembering my own, when I studied university, we were built to analyze what's out there, even if it's very selective, but we consider ourselves like, oh, no, I'm checking reality, but we look at a very selective aspect of reality, and we're trained to analyze that and make predicament based on what we see. We're not trained to transform.
No.
Which is really sad. So I think what you said is so simple and yet so powerful. I mean, what is it that we want? What kind of society that we want, and how can we build our steps towards that change? So I see it as a challenge for myself, and I pose the challenge to the colleagues here as well, because I know it's probably more difficult because it makes us get out of our own mindset and the way we've been trained as academics to dream and to see, and what is it that you want to change, whether it's in the school, whether it's in your home, and I think we need to engage with that. Let me just bring a research I've been engaged with in the recent years with some colleagues. We've been speaking with young students to see how they define and perceive peace, violence, and power. And one of the things that we found is that violence is very real for them. When you ask them about peace, it's like, okay, it takes a while because it's like the dream is not clear at all, and sometimes peace is just, I just want to be quiet and I don't want people judging me. That's just the basic. It's too minimalistic, and it goes on with the idea of empowerment as well. So I think the call here is how to allow especially young people, but also adults, but especially young people, right? They have more time ahead. They have more energy, to believe that they can create something different and imagine that. So thank you so much. And also for reminding us of the work of Elise Boulding. So I don't know if Luis wants to bring another question to close this. We still have, I don't know, at least 10 minutes before we can close the session. Or also I can also jump in, or
I just wanted to mention, if somebody wants to ask a question in Portuguese, they should do that, and you can just translate it if they're not comfortable speaking English. I understand that.
Yes, let me just say, se alguém quiser fazer a pergunta em português, pessoal, fica à vontade e a gente traduz aqui sem problemas. I think they're maybe just shy.
But maybe I think we can, if that's all right with us and with you, Mike, and maybe people can try to engage with us after watching the video, and we can try, and maybe someone has some type of question or reflection. Feel free to engage with us some way, somehow, and we'll try to, I don't know, relay something to Mike, and then maybe if you're watching this video after it was recorded, let's try to interact some way to keep thinking about it, about those important issues, and reflecting about it. And you are very much welcome to this movement, so to speak, that Roberta mentioned in the beginning of our meeting. I just would like to maybe not necessarily make a question, but just some remarks on what you brought, maybe as closing remarks on my behalf. Elise Boulding is also a very dear reference to me. She served as a very important source of inspiration for me when I began delving in peace studies 13, 14 years ago. And it reminded me, what you just said, Mike, and reminded me about something that I've just been talking about with Roberta, which is we feel motivated to try to reveal or give more importance or give more attention to movements in Brazil that could be recognized as nonviolent movements or peace movements, because there's so little material on it here in Brazil, I think. And on this regard, I think we don't need to wait for some type of academic paper to access this. And I think what you said is very important, because probably many very good examples are not far away, historically and I don't know, contextually. I think people can access those good stories. You talked about the importance of sharing good stories. I think there are many good stories. If you look in your own community in Brazil, in your own family, and I'm not trying to romanticize here, but really, I think nonviolent behavior, so to speak, is present every single day to inspire us and to promote some type of transformation and change. So I think we should just adjust our lenses or our perspectives, and we'll be able to access that, I think, really. And of course, there are some very important historical examples in Brazil that need to be more highlighted. I would say maybe we were talking, Roberta, well, the example that took place in the Amazon that is more or less famous around the world, which is the Chico Mendes-led movement in the end of the 80s or throughout the 80s. And yeah, he was assassinated, I think, in 1988. But there are so many. You yourself, Mike, and you guys shared, you, Stellan and Jorgen, you shared in your Constructive Resistance book the example of the MST, the landless movement here in Brazil, o Movimento dos Trabalhadores Sem Terra, as a very interesting example of nonviolent action. But you've mentioned Elise Boulding, and the title of her book is Cultures of Peace, Hidden Side of History. So this hidden aspect, I think, is interesting for us to dwell on. And there is one writer, a Brazilian writer, his name is Guimarães Rosa, and there is this passage of his that I like to share with people. I don't know exactly from which book, I don't know exactly when and where I came across it, but it really hit me and inspired me, which is, I will say it in Portuguese and I will try to translate it. It said, quando nada acontece, há milagre que não estamos vendo. So when nothing happens, there is a miracle we're not seeing. And I think we should pay more attention to that, really. There are so many things taking place, important actions and a lot of energy dedicated to this type of vision that we are sharing here and that we cherish everywhere around the world. And in Brazil, I'm sure there are many examples. And I would say the indigenous movement here in Brazil, the Black movement in Brazil, they are mainly, if not completely, nonviolent. And I think we can, if we are willing to, we can access those very good examples for us to follow through, feel inspired, and think about the changes and good ways to promote change and transformation in the world in a nonviolent way. Yeah, that's what I wanted to share at this moment.
I think that's beautiful. I love the quote. And I think it's also, you're really spot on to something that is just really important, and that is to document what is happening and what has happened in recent history so that we know it. So like the officers in the military, they know their war history, they know the battles, they know how, wars have been waged for centuries, and they are building on that when they're planning for the next war. While in the nonviolent movements, we have a tendency, I would say, to kind of reinvent the wheel all the time. And there's huge possibilities in learning more from recent history or from the current, what is going on currently, and in documenting and spreading it and discussing it, so that we don't have to repeat the mistakes that people have done before us. So it's not just documenting the successes, but also documenting the attempts that maybe failed, and then discuss why did they fail and what could we have done differently and how could we do it in a different way next time. Maybe not for the children, but for the adults and for those who are good at the analysis that you were talking about, Roberta, that we have been trained in doing.
Yeah, well, I'm getting out of this, of this conversation so excited, so more optimistic, recently here in Brazil, we're in I don't know, it's been a while, it's been a bad timing for us with, previous very complicated governments and the effects of the pandemic and political polarization and the role of social media kind of instigating hate, actually, so there's sometimes it's so draining and we are like, sometimes we get that hint of hopelessness, and it's never going to change. So I want to thank you and Luís for, making this happen. I think sometimes we just need a boost of, energy and to get back into our track and start thinking of the possibilities for peaceful social change. So thank you so much. So I think unless any of you had something else that they'd like to add, do you want to say something final, Maiken and Luís, before we can conclude our meeting today?
No, I just want thank you for your inviting me, and thank you so much for your kind words about my book, and I hope you will enjoy it out there, and just search for it and you will find it, and it's available for free.
Well, we'll hope maybe you'll come here in person in a next event when the book is translated. Our next Peace Studies conference shall be in Rio next year. So maybe we can put it on the agenda and we can maybe organize a small course, an intensive something on nonviolence. That would be just lovely. I'm sure there will be a lot of people interested in joining this. So I just want to thank you all and thank also Laboratório Social for hosting this event, my colleagues and the commission of the Peace Studies Conference, and all those supporters for this event, the University of São Paulo, Centro de Estudos em Conflito e Paz, NUPRI, Síntese has been helping us organize the event, the Conselho Latino-Americano de Estudos para a Paz, CLIPE. We have lots of supporters with this event, including at the regional level. So I just want to make sure I'm not forgetting anyone. Who else? SEBRI as well, which is the Brazilian think tank, has been helping us spread the word about the event. So yes, maybe Anna Tomezani, who's here, is my colleague as well. I'm not sure if I'm forgetting anyone, but everyone who's been involved in this event, thank you so much. And I hope to see you all who are watching this video presently very soon in IPPRI. Mike, and we would love to keep up with your work. Now we have Luís is more in constant touch with you, but I'm so glad we had the opportunity to meet. And whenever you have something coming out, please send it to us. We can share. We have a network where we share published work and events. So it's really about building a strong network in Brazil, but also with people from abroad. So you're also invited to check our network. It's in Portuguese, but when we do these gatherings, there's always space for multiple languages. So I don't know if Luís wants to say some final words here.
Well, yes, I would just like to thank Maiken again. I've been working very hard, Roberta, for I think 10 years for Maiken to come to Brazil. Maybe this will come true next year, Maiken and Jorgen. But anyways, I'm just very grateful for our connection and very thankful for your generosity to share a bit of your very valuable time and energy with us. And Roberta, congratulations for all this, all those initiatives, and congratulations for this 6th IPPRI. And I wish the best for this edition, and I'm sure it will be it already has been very exciting. And I think, Roberta, that now we need to commit with Maiken for us to do something about going after and registering those nonviolent movements in Brazil, as we were thinking about, as soon as possible. But let's see, it will happen in the right time. We'll do our best. But I think we have this commitment. So, and I thank everybody that has showed up today and everybody that has watched us. And I will share my Instagram account and profile just in case you feel like being in touch, which is at Karutana, Karutana. And yeah, all the best to everyone. And thanks for participating. And Maiken, thank you so much. Send my big warm hug to Jorgen.
Okay, thank you all. With this, then I conclude our event. Thank you so much. Hope to see you all very soon. Obrigado, pessoal. Obrigado, pessoal aí do laboratório. Até a próxima.